So good morning. So my name is David Blank Edelman. I, believe it or not, I kind of don't believe it, work for Microsoft, where I'm a senior cloud ops advocate, and I pay a lot of attention to site reliability engineering stuff, SRE. So let me just sort of get a little bit of a sense, let me just switch my thing over here, of how many people in this room know what site reliability engineering is. We'll do. Okay, that's good. How many people in this room consider themselves to be SREs for a living? Okay, so look around. These are the people you want to talk to if I get this wrong. So you should ask them, you know, like, so your job is to keep me honest and make sure that I'm going to say the right stuff. For those people that don't know what SRE is, let's do sort of like a little bit of a level set, just so you understand where the stuff we're talking about comes from. So this is my best definition of what site reliability engineering is. It's a big block of text. I'll read it to you. There are three important words in this. Site reliability engineering is an engineering discipline devoted to helping an organization sustainably achieve the appropriate level of reliability in their systems, services, and products. If you would like to help me translate that to Ivrit later, I would very much like that. That would be very cool. I would like to be able to show it and say, I don't know this so well, but this is what it means. Here's the words from this definition that I want to highlight. The first one is reliability. So my first question for you is, what's this? What does this slide mean? Please raise your hand. Well, I mean, I worked really hard on this slide, so I want you to know. So, yes, sir.
Okay, yeah.
Holy smokes, that is the first time in a good 3 years that I've given talks like this in which someone has gotten this right. This is, in fact, what happens when a PHP app errors out. Here, I'll put this on. I tend to not put up Java stack traces if I can help it, just because it causes people in the audience to twitch a little bit. So we'll go back to the PHP one, because it's nice and soothing. So here's the point. You can have the most amazing application or system in service in the world. You can pour millions, billions of shekels and dollars into your app. It can do so many things. It can walk the dog. It can go get your dry cleaning. It can, you know, serve in the army. It can do all these things. But if it's not up, it's worthless to everyone. And all that money goes downhill. So that's why reliability is the thing that we focus on with SRE as one of the primary parts of what you want to make sure you ensure in your systems. Another important word of this definition is the word appropriate. By appropriate, I mean it is almost never the case, and this is going to be a little bit of heresy, that you need 100% reliability, or you even want 100% reliability. There are certain exceptions that, the things that fly in the air, you really want them to be 100% reliable. The thing that ticks in your test, right? You want to make sure that that's reliable, but you don't need it everywhere else. And in fact, you don't want to even try. And there are many reasons for that. One reason is chances are, even if you create the most reliable thing in the world, you're going to be using something that has dependencies. And I bet those dependencies aren't 100% reliable. Or let's assume that I have an application and it is on the web. I don't know what the ISPs are like in Israel. Are they up 100% of the time?
Oh yeah, sure.
So there you go, right? So if they're not, and you have poured a lot of money into it, and your users and customers can't get to your thing 100% of the time, it's not worth it. So there are lots of other good reasons that we can talk about why 100% is the wrong goal. So that's why appropriate is important. And the final thing I want to say, and we'll point this out later, is sustainably. It is the case that you cannot create reliable systems, and you'll hear me say this again, from people that are burnt out, from people that cannot continue to run your systems. It's just not possible. In fact, it's not even desirable. It's not even ethical to do this. So it's really important to come up with a practice that you can sustain, not something where we go all out all the time, and at the end you just have somebody who is over in the corner who has been has been extra fried. So, okay. So site reliability engineering is trying to deal with this push-pull, this sort of tug-of-war thing that goes on in DevOps as well, where on this side, you have the people who are responsible for creating the software, whose job it is to iterate the software, to write more, to add features, to make it do things. And on this side, you have the group of people whose job it is to make sure that that software runs reliably in production, which means that the less you change it, the better. And their job is to focus on this sort of operability and keeping stuff running and keeping it going. So you have this tug of war, because on one hand you have people whose job it is to change things as much as possible. On the other hand, you have a group of people whose job would be very much helped if things never changed, right, once it was running. So the other thing that I think it's really important to say whenever I talk about site reliability engineering is site reliability engineering is not the next evolutionary step from DevOps. It is not that once we were once sysadmins, then we grew up and we became DevOps, and now someday we hope to mature and become site SREs. It is not the case. In my opinion, site reliability engineering is just another parallel track of operations that is attempting to solve similar problems. So please don't take it that I think that everybody in this room, I hope someday you'll be SREs. That is not what I hope. I hope that you'll take something from SRE, but I don't think you should expect to grow up and become an SRE. The best way I know to talk about this in context is to start with a talk that was given at a conference that I helped start a long time ago called SEO Recon, which is a conference for SREs. At that conference, the very first talk given on the very first day, in the very first time we had it, and now it's been had in several continents around, was given by Trainer SPLOST. Then at that point, Trainer, he hadn't married at that point. He was the person at Google in 2003 that came up with the notion of site reliability engineering. And in his talk, he put up this slide. You don't have to read all these things. In fact, I'm not even going to let you read all these things. We're just going to focus on some of these, just so you have some context here. So let's talk about the first three things that I have highlighted here. So the first thing is this notion that you should have an SLA for your service, which is kind of weird because they don't really talk about SLAs in Google. I don't know why he used that term. You measure report against that SLA, and you use error budgets. And we'll talk about what error budgets are later. But here's the general idea. Step one, figure out your system and what in your system you want to measure, so you understand whether it is reliable. What is your understanding about that? And we'll talk about that. And that's a service level indicator. What is the indicator for reliability? Once you have an indicator, your job next is to come up with an objective. Where do I want that indicator to stay? Or to stay above or below, or however you measure it. Once you have that, you have a service level objective, and that's exactly what we'll be talking about in this talk. Congratulations, you have these things. Your next step is to put that SLO into place into your monitoring system, so that we can all look at the monitoring system and go, hey, how are we doing? Oh, we're not doing so good. Oh, we're doing great. It's important to have a monitoring system that everybody trusts and that is a single source of truth. So once it's in your monitoring system, then you can do things like this. Let's say you have a new version, you're trying to think about whether you should release it. Well, I can look at my monitoring system and say, well, let's say this thing that I'm trying to run, I'll use an example to make it easy. Let's say I want it to be up 90% of the time. It's a terrible SLO, but we'll use it. So 90% of the time. So I look at my monitoring system and I say, hey, our thing has been up 95% of the time. It's been available 95% of the time. Well, now I can make the decision, okay, maybe I'll launch a new version. Maybe it's okay to perturb it. Maybe it's okay to add a little bit of change to the system. Or maybe I look at the system and I say, hey, wait a second. Our thing has only been working 60% of the time. What's going on here? And I might choose at that moment to make a different decision about what to do when it comes to that new release. I might say, hey, we're not going to release anything new until we figure out what's going on with this. So that's the basic choice. Okay, so why are these things important? What is the use of what we're going to learn today? How is this helpful to you? So the first important thing to understand about SLIs and SLOs, service level indicators and service level objectives, is they provide a common ground and a common language so that everybody in the company, everybody in the organization can speak the same language. We can all say, oh, I see, this is how we're measuring reliability. Oh, I see, we haven't been that reliable, or we have. There's no arguments about this. There's no need to translate. Developers understand it, stakeholders understand it, all the VPs understand it. You're speaking the same language. And this is tremendously useful. Though those of us who know about the Tower of Babel know it's not always that useful. The other thing that is really good about these things is it allows you to focus on the data. You have a conversation that is based on data, not, hey, I think we were up a lot in February, or, yeah, you know, it doesn't feel like things are running so good, right? That's not the sort of conversation you need to have. You need to have something that's on objective data, not somebody's feelings about this. And the other thing that you get a chance to do is it creates this virtuous cycle. You have the ability, if everybody's paying attention to reliability in the same way, to increase your reliability as we look at it and say, hey, not so good. Oh, it's getting better. We know exactly how much it's getting better, and we're talking about it in a way that helps it get better. There are two things that I want to add as sort of small little asides, just so you understand, so you don't think I'm promising you something that I'm not. Step number one, SLIs and SLOs are not magic. It is not the case that I can walk into an organization, have you start doing SLIs and SLOs like a toxic organization where everybody hates each other and they're all, you know, they all are carrying like a knife in their boot, you know, for when they need to use it in the next meeting. Or, you know, I mean, we've all worked in organizations, I hope you haven't, but we all worked in situations that are toxic. SLIs and SLOs will not make your environment less toxic. They might help some, but they are not magic. So that's an important thing to understand. Your company will not automatically become much more profitable. Your organization might not serve more people just because you do SLIs and SLOs, but it could help. And the other thing to realize is it's not entirely clear that this is the only way to help. I just want to be clear about that. I don't want to say I am selling you the one true path. Anybody who tells you that they're walking the one true path, well, I think you're supposed to kill them, I believe, right? I believe the expression if you see the Buddha on the path. But anyway, just going back to the previous awesome talk. Sorry, have to include it. Okay, so let's talk about SLIs, service level indicators. So the thing to understand about SLIs is that we're talking about reliability, and reliability means a lot of different things. If you think about it. The first one that everybody thinks about is availability. Is my service up? Can I get to it? Right? That's pretty obvious, and that's probably the thing that you'll be dealing with most of the time. But it's not the only thing, and I want to make sure that you have sort of a broad understanding of reliability. The other possibility is you might care about latency, right? There's this notion that slow is the new down. Have you heard that before? Right? And so if something is too slow, you might want to make sure that you have the right level of latency. Or not. Sometimes you care about throughput. If you're running, say, a batch processing system or you're running a pipeline, you care a lot about throughput, and you need to measure that also. Or maybe you care about coverage. How much of the database have I processed? How much of the data have I processed? That's a big question. Correctness. This is something that maybe you think about, maybe you don't. I hope you do. But are you doing something to measure, did my systems do the right thing when they process the data? It's a little hard to write tests for that, but it's not impossible. And sometimes it's crucially important. Quality. Quality is a strange thing. Let me explain what quality means. There is, in where I come from, a video streaming site. I'm sure they exist here as well, right? Where you go to that site and it says, hey, here are the movies I recommend you watch. And then it allows you to watch a movie. Yes, something similar here, please? Yeah. Yes? Okay. So there's Netflix also here? Yeah. Awesome, great. I am actually talking about Netflix. Wait, you have computers? Sorry, you can tell that I need to spend more time in Israel just to get the lay of the land. So in Netflix, and this is actually where the example comes from. In Netflix, if they're having a problem with their recommendation engine, the thing that puts the, here's what I think you should watch. They don't say, hey, sorry, can't stream, can't even get to the website, our recommendation engine's down, we're done, right? Instead, what they will do is they will serve data in a degraded fashion where they'll show you these are the upcoming movies that we're about to show, or these are the most popular movies, right? And if your recommendations don't show up on the page, they don't panic, they fix it, but they give you degraded information. And so quality is that measurement of what's the fidelity of what I have just delivered to you. Have I delivered you the entire experience or just part of an experience? And you want to measure that. If you're dealing with a system for which freshness is important, let's say sports scores, or the Eurovision contest. I know you know about that one. That was a great win. Yes, I pay attention to that in the US. I don't know about everybody else, but anyway, so you might care a lot about freshness. And then finally, if you're in charge of a storage system or a database system, you kind of want to measure if I put a bit in, I'm going to get that bit out again later, right? That's important, and you need to be able to have objectives and indicators around that. Now, let me say the most important thing. People love to take a picture of this slide, but if you're going to take a picture of a slide, take a picture of this one, which has that on it. What I want you to understand is everything that we're talking about here is from the perspective of the customer or the user be that internal, be it external. It does you no good to say, here, I'll get out of the way so people, anyone want to do a selfie with this? It does you no good to measure how hot your CPU is running. Who cares? I don't really care. The question is, from the customer's perspective, am I achieving that reliability? Because we're doing it for a reason, right? We're not running machines because we like to walk over and pet them or pay money to Azure or something like that. We do it because we're trying to serve something and serve somebody. Okay? And so all of this has to be measured from that perspective. If you take one thing away from this, this is a good thing to take away. If you want to take a second thing, I'm happy to do a picture, like a commemorative picture and sign your picture later if you want. So here's how SLIs are computed, just so you understand. So this is pretty easy. So you might decide to come up with SLIs, and they're basically ratios. So an example would be the number of successful HTTP calls over the number of total calls. Yes? Makes sense? Or maybe the number of operations that completed in less than 10 milliseconds. Or the number of full quality responses that we were talking about before. Or the number of records processed over the number of records total, right? It's a ratio. So you can probably guess that, right? It's not that hard. So let's do this terrible math. If we were to take the ratio, multiply it by 100, we get a percentage proportion. And we're going to test your math skills in just a second, just so you understand. But here's a key thing that I want to say about this. It is really crucial to say how and where you are measuring this in your SLIs. Okay? So, for example, I might say that ratio as measured at my load balancer. Does that make sense to you? That I have to tell you where I am getting it from for us to have a really useful conversation? Because you may think it's the load balancer and I may think it's the server, and we are talking two completely different things. Because let's say you have a situation where all your packets don't get to your server. If I measure if I go to the server and ask it like how many successful calls, I may not know about the ones that failed because I never saw the data. Right? So it's crucial to say that. Or you measure it to client if you're doing some sort of latency thing. Or in your server log, or determined by the app, or something like that. Just so you understand, it's kind of crucial. Okay, let's do the terrible math. This is how hard simple SLIs are. Are you ready? Can we work really hard on this? Ready? I'm going to show you some complex math. Let's say we have 50 successful HTTP calls out of 100 HTTP calls. Are you ready? The ratio is 0.5. Got it? This is how hard we're going to get.
Are you sure?
I'm pretty sure. Are you sure? Okay, so if we were to do this multiplication, anybody here ready for this stuff? Do you have your calculator out? Somebody care to tell me how reliable that is?
50%.
Yes, there we go. 50% availability. That's it. That's how hard that is. Now, where do these numbers come from? Like when you're trying to decide like where do I go get these numbers to measure? Well, maybe you go look at it at the server. Maybe it's on the server itself tells you, or there's some sort of log collector that pulls it up. Maybe I have some sort of client library that reports back to a telemetry system. Maybe it's reported by my application itself. Maybe the front end, the load balancer tells me these things. Or maybe I get it from the monitoring or we all were running some sort of monitoring or test infrastructure, I hope. I hope you're running a monitoring infrastructure, otherwise we'll have a second SRE talk after this. Here's the thing, it's your call. I'm not going to tell you where you have to do this measurement. It's up to you. But just understand those trade-offs. Understand that situation where if I measured over here, I may not see all the packets. Right? If I measure it at the server, I may not see all the failures. And that might be crucial. Oh, and the other thing that's down here, I'm sorry, the tiny thing at the bottom says, you have to be able to trust your monitoring system for this to work. If somebody can walk over and say, I'm looking at this monitoring system and it's lacking the data from Tuesday. I think your monitoring system isn't worth dreck, right? Like if you, sorry, I don't even know if I'm allowed to say it on the stage, but it's not worth anything. If somebody can say to you, I don't trust your monitoring system, then this all goes out the window. Okay, so that's a crucial requirement to do these things. Okay, great. So now let's do service level objectives. The way it helps me to understand service level objectives is to emphasize the last word. So I would like to now hear, in your best American accent, you say the word objectives.
Objectives.
That was pretty good. That was almost like you, Laurie, doing it. So I want to appreciate how well you did that. You had the nice nasal quality. If you'd like, I'll show you my American Hebrew. It has a lot of chets in it, if you like. So Service level objectives are objectives. What do I want to make sure that is true? What is my objective? So let's say I'm making an SLO. Let's pretend I'm making an SLO cake. Let's give you the recipe. The first step is, what is it that I'm measuring? In this particular case, it could be HTTP requests, it could be storage checks, it could be operations. In this particular case, I'm going to measure HTTP requests, as reported by the load balancer, that have succeeded. Yes? Got that? Yes? Okay. So that's the first thing. What is it we're measuring? And then the question is, what is the proportion? Well, I'm going to say 90%. Again, terrible, if it's up, 90% might be actually fine. Successful 50% of the time, can read the data 99.9% of the time, returns in 10 milliseconds 90% of the time. There we go. 90% of HTTP requests as reported by the load balancer have succeeded. And the last thing that you need for a successful SLO is some sort of time boundary. In the last 10-minute period, during the last quarter, in the previous rolling 30-day period, and in fact, SLOs are often done in rolling 30-day things or rolling 7-day things, as opposed to this month, because days change. But sometimes you want them per month, especially for financial stuff. Okay? So congratulations, your first SLO. Applause, please. Yeah. And the reason why that's so weak is you're like, is it really this easy? And the answer is yes, it can be really this easy. So that's why you don't have to, I'm not going to show you something that you're walking away going, I could never do that. That's alchemy. Okay, so if you want to make it more complex, you can. In fact, you'll eventually find yourself doing that. You'll start doing things like compound ones, where you say, okay, 90% of the reads took place in 10 milliseconds, but 95% did in less than 20 milliseconds. You start doing these compound statements, where you're trying to model the system in a better way, right? Not just a simple thing. Or you might do things by percentiles, 95th percentile, that sort of stuff. That can come later. There's no reason why you have to start there, but that will eventually show up when you do this stuff. Okay, so where do we get these SLOs? Where am I going to get these numbers from? How am I going to determine what the right numbers are? The first possibility is that maybe I already know that there's this customer expectation that my latency has to be this slow because I have some monitoring that says I start losing business if it gets any slower than that. Or maybe somebody comes to me and says, hey, I want to use your service and I expect from you a response within 10 milliseconds. Right? Sometimes some customers will just tell you and you'll just know what they are. And that's great. And you can use them and that's fabulous. Sometimes there's some other data where somebody out there somewhere says, I think the number here should be 90%. And you're like, cool. Right? And you don't know where they get it from, or maybe they don't even know where they got it from, but sometimes somebody will just hand you a number, and you could use that number if you wanted to. It is possible to use the current state of the system. You can say, hey, we've been running at 90% for the last 3 months. Let's use 90%. The thing that I want to tell you, and I want to warn you about doing that, it's certainly possible. In the absence of any other data, it's not bad. But if you do that, then sometimes you will box yourself in unnecessarily. Let's say that you've been running at 95%, and so you say, oh, I think 95% is a good SLO. And then you realize that you had just a really good week. But it's not usually like that. Or maybe the people that are expecting data from you don't need it at 95%, and you could have more room and slack if you wanted to. So just a warning along those lines. Okay, so what do we do with this stuff? In SRE, there's also the concept of something called an error budget. And so let's talk a little bit about error budgets. Okay, so here's error budgets. Let's assume that we've done that previous exercise, and we've come up with 3 different SLOs. One that says, hey, the system should be only 60% available, or whatever you want to say. This one over here should be 70%, and this one should be 90%. The error budget is simply this extra stuff at the end. Does that make sense? It's this extra slack we have. It's this extra thing at the end, after which I don't care if the system is down, because I have already met my objective. It's this pool of unreliability that I can draw upon. Does that make sense? If I say it's okay to be up 60% of the time, and I have been up 62% of the time, the rest is, the American idiom would be gravy, but I don't know what you'd say in Hebrew. Say again? You don't have to translate the word Hebrew, gravy for me, because I bet it's not that. Oh yeah, the rest is hummus? Probably not so much. So here's the thing. This plus having some sort of plan or policy of what to do with this extra stuff makes up an error budget. So what do? Well, what do you do? So the question I want to ask is, what do you do if you exceed your error budget? And what do you do if you exhaust your error budget? And I'm going to give you the only one true answer that anybody can ever give you. And I'm going to be absolutely honest with you, because anybody who tells you anything different than what I'm about to tell you is lying, or at least misinformed. The only answer to these two questions are, it depends. I want to be very clear about that. It really does depend on how you want to do things in your environment and what makes sense for you. But let me give you a couple of options. So let's say you exceed your error budget, right? Where you've successfully been up for more than you expected. Yay! You did it! Congratulations! Celebrate! Break out the the hummus, I guess is. Right? You just pour it into like a champagne cup. Anyway, right? So, no, but it's good, right? I mean, this is a good place to be. So what do we do about this? Well, maybe what we might choose to do is release faster. We might increase the release cadence. That seems perfectly reasonable. That's a perfectly reasonable thing to do. Or maybe we'll increase the number of features that we're going to include in the product. Sounds great. Can do that because we can now be a little less reliable. We have a little more room to play. We can experiment a little bit more. We can have more experimental features. We can rewrite things and put experimental things in, because now we know that if we perturb the reliability, it's okay. And we can just simply increase the change in our environment if our error budget, if we exceeded our error budget. Or here's the thing you could also do: nothing. You could simply do nothing. You could celebrate your thing and do nothing different. It's a possibility. I just want you to understand that nothing compels you to go do anything, right? So, or as someone suggests, you could also go change your SLO and make them more something if you wanted to. But I don't think that's necessarily. It might be the right thing to do. Now, let's say you've exhausted your error budget. Let's say for some reason that Slack has gone down and you are less reliable than you had hoped for. Uh-oh. Now we might want to do something about it, right? So we might do things like we might release a little slower, because now we have to spend a little bit of time instrumenting our system to find out what happened. How did this go wrong? What went wrong with this? We might want to focus our resources on reliability, instrumentation, going back and looking at how did this fail in production. We might want to spend the time on that, and it's probably a good use of your time. You might divert engineering resources to look at that. You might, if you have to, push the big red button, the thing that says, everybody stop. Entire company, entire organization stop. We have not been reliable enough. We are so far down that this is a crisis and we need to pay attention to it with all our resources. Sometimes that happens. And it happens in lots of companies. It happens in Google, where they will push the big red button and say, sorry, no more releases, no more anything until we figure out what the heck is happening with our SLOs. Or you might say, hey, maybe to go to your point, maybe our SLIs and SLOs aren't correct. Maybe they are too strict. And maybe I need to loosen them. That's okay. It's perfectly reasonable. And then again, here's the last thing you could possibly do. It says nothing. You could choose to do nothing with this. You could choose to say, this is information. Take it for someone who's been in couples counseling before. One of the things that you learn when you speak to your spouse is, that's information, what you're telling me. I don't necessarily have to do something about it, but now I understand it, right? We can have a long conversation about this afterwards if you like. We'll have a whole open space about couples counseling if you want. So, okay. So, great. Here's the key thing. No matter what you do when any of these things happen, make a plan and follow your plan. Don't be sitting around on Thursday or Friday and go, hey, we have exhausted our error budget. What do you think we should do? I don't know. What do you think we should do? I don't know. What do you think we should, you don't want to be doing that, right? You want to have a plan in place and you want to follow that plan. Feel free to adjust it later, but that's the key thing to understand is when this happens, make a plan and follow the plan. So my question is, before I talk a little bit about how to get further into SRE, would you like to ask questions now, or would you like to know how I suggest you get deeper into the land of SRE? Are there questions? Otherwise, we'll save the questions to end, then we can have a little bit of question time and a little bit of discussion about my marriage. Whatever you like. If you want.
Only one marriage?
Only one marriage, 27 years.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's true. We're great. I'm going to go home and say, honey, I had a great talk, and they applauded for our marriage. And she's going to be like, why are you saying this on stage? But actually, she probably won't, because it's been, like I said, 27 years.
What's your secret? Do nothing?
What's your secret? Do nothing, yeah. I would like to suggest, humbly, that it is just like DevOps is work. So is that really what we're going to talk about during question and answer? Is that really? Because that's not exactly where I was prepared to go, but I can do it. How many kids? Oh, great, this is lovely. This is how you know you're in Israel, right? I have one. His name is Elijah. He is 12. He has his bar mitzvah coming up. It's going to be wonderful, I hope. So, yeah, I know. So now we're all felling. It's great. I love it. Anyway, if you have a question that's not about me and my family, please. I just ask, pretty please.
Yeah, when you said you mean like in advance or...
Yeah, so the question is, when you say make a plan, follow plan, I am saying that as part of your construction of your error budget, you need to have a conversation with the stakeholders that say, okay, let's assume we're doing really great. What do we do about it? Let's assume that we are doing poorly. What are we going to do? And you might have as part of that actual thing that you write down, when you write down all these things, because you better be writing this stuff down. You don't want to be thinking like, what did we say, 60%? No, I'm pretty sure I heard 65% in that meeting. You know, in that thing, you want to have a plan that you have written down and everyone agrees to. You know, and if you look at the plan 6 months later and it's stupid and it's like, if our SLO falls behind 70%, we should run around going, help me, like that's your plan. Then maybe you want to change that. I think that's perfectly reasonable. Yes, sir. So the question is, how do you know when how do you know when you've got the right SLO, essentially? And the short answer is that's usually as part of a conversation. Usually you have this conversation, you walk up to a developer like this, and you say, so tell me, you have this great application. How much do you think it needs to be up? How is it going to fail? What is important to you? Or maybe you come over here to this person here who runs the company, and you say to this person, what is important to you? How much money should we spend? So it's one of these conversations where it depends, where your job is to attempt to get an understanding that is communally from the stakeholders of what is the right thing. How can you tell when we're running? Because, for example, you might look at the dependencies on that service and say, they're all expecting you to be up 70% of the time. So that would be one way you could find what matters to you. You could look at drop-offs on sales. There's lots of ways to determine what's there. And you will always be tweaking these things up and down, if that makes sense. Other questions? I like coming out here in the audience. You guys you're a beautiful audience. So, any other questions? Yes, sir. So the question is, how do you deal with client diversity? So what I like about what you're saying is that you're looking at it, or immediately you're starting to think clients and you're starting to think customers. So good for you for thinking that way. So the answer to the question is, I'm going to get a shirt, by the way, that just says, it depends. Or I'm going to work on stage with like a set of adult diapers that just say depends, and just wave it in the air if I have to. But the short answer is, it depends. You might choose to make an SLO that's a compound one that says, hey, I want to make sure my 95 percentile of this is this, my 50th percentile is this, and etc. So you might choose to make a more complex SLO to better model what's important to you. So the question is how many SLIs and SLO do you have per application and system and service? Want to guess what my answer is? Anybody here? Like if I can get the entire audience to say it depends to you, does that help? Because I can do that. Here, let's try that.
It depends.
There you go. So the answer is you have to sort of play with it to see what makes sense to you. Too many and too complex a thing where you can't monitor it and you can't understand it and you can't understand what the system you're trying to model is does not work. A simple thing that says, yes, no, also does not work, right? So you have to find the balance that works for you on that system, and it depends on the system itself and the complexity of that system. I'll take one more. Well, actually, let's do this part here. Let's talk about how, if you decide you want to get into SRE, including the people that just walked in. Pleasure to see you. You missed an awesome talk. These people in the room will tell you. If you want to get into SRE, here's the way I recommend, because people usually ask me, how do I get started? The first thing I'd say is that there are 3 lovely books from OReilly, and just as a disclaimer, I helped edit one of them. The one on the end, the Lemur book, is mine. And they're a really good one of how did Google do SRE? How do they think that other people can do it, and some other examples and some more how to do that sort of stuff. This is what they did. This is kind of how to do it. And mine is sort of a way that, mine is a book that tries to expand the question, what's it mean to do SRE? What are the important things that you have to know about? How do companies that are not Google and Amazon do things? How do companies that that look closer to what you're used to do things? And that's where that comes from. I think it's a lovely book. If you want to wait for the movie, I think that's perfectly reasonable.
Signed copies?
Signed copies. If you got a copy, I'll sign it. That's the best I can. I don't know how available it is here. I know you can get this online electronically easily. So the other thing is, again, this is, and again, disclaimer, because I had something to do with this as well. There's a lovely set of conferences that takes place on 3 continents called SEO Recon. The next one is going to be in Brooklyn, New York, which I think is a pretty cool place. So come visit if you can. Make sure if you come, you tell me so we can all get together and talk about that time where we were in a room together and talk about this. And the other thing that I want to say is, how do you personally start? For fun, down here, there's a link to an online course that I wrote for Microsoft, which is free. You can go get that. I'll get out of the way for that. The other thing is, my experience is people typically start because they have a problem, or they have some downtime, or they have an epiphany. They wake up in the middle of the night and they go, hey, wait a second, I should do SRE. But it doesn't usually happen that way. Usually what happens is they have a bad downtime. The other thing you'll need to do is get management support lined up, and we can talk about what that means. I recommend when you read those books, and this is my last slide in case you're concerned. One of the things that you should do is read the book critically. Don't look at them like there's some sort of like they're Siddharim, right? Don't be reading them to each other, right? As if this is the thing you have to follow, right? Look at them and figure out which makes sense for you in the actual books. Hang out with other SREs, people who have the same problems you do, and then maybe start doing SLOs and error budgets. So I love talking about this stuff. I'm going to try to do an open spaces thing. I hope you want to talk about it. Tonight I got no dinner plans, so if you have any suggestions, let me know, and you want to go out. I'm happy to go out with a bunch of people and talk about this sort of stuff. I want to thank you very much for being such a warm and welcoming audience. It's great to be here. Thank you.